In a time where the Ace Attorney series feels as though it's lost its sense of direction and uncertainty looms for what the stories of future games will hold, there has never been a better time to revisit the many games that we have now. Perhaps more importantly though, the Ace Attorney series desperately needs to expand its audience. The lack of a Western localization for the Daigyakuten Saibon duology and the ever embarrassing sales of the numbered entries show that even in a time where Phoenix Wright is still an iconic character, the series he represents appears to be in deeper trouble than many may perceive. Without a doubt, Capcom's decision to release another enhanced port of the Phoenix Wright Trilogy on more platforms is a great decision. If you're new here, hello, I'm IKG Productions. This is going to be a review of a re-release of the Phoenix Wright Ace Attorney Trilogy. I consider myself to be a die-hard Ace Attorney fan. This series has a very special place in my heart, and for various reasons. The quality of this collection means a lot to me, to say the least. Before I continue, I would like to make it apparent that this is not a review of the game's stories. For a series of detailed analyses on the Ace Attorney game's stories, I would highly recommend my long-term review series, Ace Attorney Analyzation. I recognize that this is a blatant plug for new viewers, but I cannot stress enough how central they are to my channel's history and how Ace Attorney Analyzation is where one can find the core Ace Attorney content on IKG. However, there are a few things I'd like to discuss about that review series to any new viewers before you may decide to watch them, and I'll discuss them at the end of this video. Another quick remark from me, this review will be spoiler-free with the exception of certain aspects that will come later. I will provide a generous spoiler warning with a timestamp to help with that. Because of that, I am titling this video as spoiler-free. Phoenix Wright Ace Attorney Trilogy is a collection of the first 3 games in the franchise, that being Phoenix Wright Ace Attorney, Phoenix Wright Ace Attorney Justice for All, and Phoenix Wright Ace Attorney Trials and Tribulations. Technically, this exact collection has already released multiple times beforehand, with those platforms being iOS and Android on mobile, and the Nintendo 3DS. However, there are very important differences among these versions of the trilogy that I believe affect the enjoyment one has with these games. Yet, more on that will come later. The Ace Attorney series is defined by many aspects. First, there's the cast of characters. Phoenix Wright, the relatable protagonist who is notable for his judgmental and goofy sides, but also his kind heart and strong-willed nature. Maya Fey, the silly assistant that befriends Mr. Wright and builds upon her spirit channeling abilities. Miles Edgeworth, the ruthless prosecutor who harshly goes after all defendants in his path. Detective Gumshoe, the lovable detective that you credit for trying his absolute best no matter the execution of his actions. These are just a few of the characters that players have and will continue to care about, and witness how they adapt to the very legal setting of the Ace Attorney series. Ace Attorney is also known for its satisfactory pace. Many have often analyzed how the music, writing, and visuals combine into making the courtroom battles thrilling to participate in. There's a lot of enjoyment to be had with these games, and I can only hope that more will partake in playing them with the widespread release of this collection. This release of the Phoenix Wright Trilogy contains what can be considered new features that were never part of the DS originals. Most notable is the brand new UI. This interface has garnered some criticism among fans of the series, although I like it quite a bit. The games benefit from a clean visual tone such as this, although I personally would have preferred the brown fabric look which was adopted by Dual Destinies and Spirit of Justice. Regardless of the player's preference, the new UI does offer a new element to the trilogy, which is appreciated. Transitioning from visuals to the subject of gameplay and mechanical changes, it's no secret that the first few Ace Attorney games included very minimalistic gameplay. While there are no groundbreaking changes to this collection, I find it worthwhile to evaluate how the unique gameplay scenarios in Rise from the Ashes fare in transition to this port. This is where I caution any of you who have not played the first Ace Attorney game, Phoenix Wright Ace Attorney. This is a spoiler warning for sections from the final case in the game, Rise from the Ashes. To avoid spoilers, please skip ahead to the timestamp displayed on screen. Rise from the Ashes establishes special investigative abilities that were originally designed with the Nintendo DS in mind. The gameplay mechanics do not work as well in this collection as they do in the DS versions. unless the player is playing the Nintendo Switch version in handheld form, to which they have access to the touchscreen. Rotating objects feels a little more clunky than it used to be, but it still works fine enough. When it comes to viewing the camera footage with 3D models, there are no problems at all. In fact, it works excellently. Spraying areas with Emma Sky's luminol is once again a little more clunky than in previous releases, but it works just fine. A majority of Rise from the Ashes exclusive gameplay mechanics feature use of a cursor that the player can move around the screen, which is an adequate way of compensating for the lack of a touchscreen. Well, in most releases of this collection. Well, the standard tried and true gameplay is just as functional as the originals. When in doubt, Capcom decided to use the cursor. Otherwise, selecting between the menus is the name of the game. Really, there's not much I can say here. PW, JFA, and TNT play essentially the same as they always have. Now, I'd like to compare this release of the Phoenix Wright Trilogy to its previous releases. In all honesty, the mobile port of the trilogy is an absolute abomination. I never expected that Ace Attorney games would be difficult to port, and this expectation leads me to believe that no care was put into this port whatsoever. First of all, the HD sprites are far from great. Many of them have an oddly drawn look to them, with the clothing details and facial features not living up to the DS sprites, despite being in HD. The frame rate of these ports is at an unacceptable low, well below 30 frames per second. Now, many of you may be thinking, why would the frame rate of a visual novel like this matter? And that is a perfectly valid question. The reason I'd argue this is important is the fact that the DS originals ran at a much smoother and more consistent frame rate to begin with, and the little animations that the sprites have in these games really benefit from a high and consistent frame rate. Anyways, the 3DS port that released a couple years later was an improvement in both aspects, but still couldn't match the quality of the DS original. Well, I'm happy to say that finally, there's a great way to experience PW, JFA, and TNT once again. Regarding the Phoenix Wright Ace Attorney Trilogy collection from a visual standpoint, PW, JFA, and TNT are all displayed in HD, widescreen, and run at a smooth 60 frames per second. Just as a quick disclaimer, not all of the footage for Justice for All and Trials and Tribulations is in 60 frames per second in this video, as I couldn't obtain all of that footage before this review's scheduled release, so please note that not all of the footage is rendered at 60 FPS. Anyways, these games have never looked better. While I will always appreciate the sprites from the original games, I cannot deny that everything has been upgraded in the best way possible. The courtroom takes the cake for being the background that has seen the most substantial improvement between the ports, and I think a comparison between the courtroom here and the DS version tells all. What I love the most about these HD backgrounds is that they still manage to represent the art style of these Ace Attorney games really well. Every Ace Attorney game from the first one through Investigations 2 had adopted an art style that contained a fine line between Japanese and Western artistry, not really leaning towards one side over the other. It's impressive that Ace Attorney's distinct visuals were kept intact, and I cannot be more thankful for this. The frame rate never dips below the target of 60, however, specific animations from the DS originals that were already pretty minimalistic to begin with lack additional detail, unfortunately. This is quite a bummer for a fan of the series, including myself. On the contrary, however, I checked for missing animation detail in all three of the games, and I found that nothing was missing from the DS originals, so at least there's that. Now, this is not necessarily worthy of praise, but the previous ports of the Phoenix Wright Trilogy lacked the simple attention to detail that has been established. Phoenix Wright Ace Attorney Trilogy is available for PlayStation 4, Xbox One, Nintendo Switch, and Steam. Aside from graphical output, there is essentially no difference between the different releases, with the one exception being that the Nintendo Switch version supports full use of the touchscreen as hinted at before. I was able to experience the collection on all of the platforms it released on, though I will continue to spend more time playing the Steam version personally. This release of the Phoenix Wright Trilogy supports many languages. In addition to the typically expected languages, French, German, Korean, simplified Chinese, and traditional Chinese language support is being added. Once again, this is a brilliant way of expanding Ace Attorney's audience, and I'm all for it. Well, this certainly was a brief review for me, but it's time to bring it to a close. I refrained from giving the Ace Attorney games a recommendation score in their respective reviews. However, I have decided to give a score to this collection. Please note that the recommendation score given isn't meant to be taken as seriously as the review itself, but I digress. Whether you are looking to experience the Ace Attorney series for the very first time, or are looking for a new way to play the games that you love, I am more than happy to report that we have a new release of these games that matches and even surpasses the original DS releases. I love PW, JFA, and TNT very much. They each offer their own unique, nuanced writing, thrilling cases, and enjoyable cast of characters. I truly hope that this iteration of the Phoenix Wright Ace Attorney trilogy sells well, and it's with this that I declare the Phoenix Wright Ace Attorney trilogy is very worthy of your time and money. Ace Attorney won't interest everyone, but this collection has a low entry ceiling. These games only require a basic reading ability to enjoy, so I would argue that they are much more accessible than they may seem. And also, the price point and availability of the collection is quite favorable to the consumer, which is all to say that I give it a very high recommendation for both fans of the series and newcomers alike. Hi everyone, I hope you enjoyed this brief review of the Phoenix Wright Ace Attorney trilogy. I apologize for my voice in this video as I'm coming down with some allergies. If you would like to support the channel, please subscribe and perhaps donate to my Patreon. More information on such can be found on my Patreon page. As for the other Ace Attorney content, this is where I once again reference Ace Attorney Analyzation. What I was hinting at explaining earlier is that 3A number 1, the review of PW, has aged a lot, and 3A number 2 has in some aspects as well. My opinions in those videos are still true, but the summarization overtakes the analysis a lot, and not much was said about the first game in detail, though more analysis of PW will be revealed later, as the review series is cumulative. Anyways, that's basically just a personal warning regarding the quality of the first 3A and some aspects of the second 3A. Aside from lengthy analyses, I also host Turnabout Podcast. It's a podcast where a guest and I discuss an aspect of the series for about an hour. I recommend starting with the second one and continuing from there. If you haven't tried these games yet, folks, you really should. I highly recommend it. With all that said, I'm IKG Productions, and I hope you have a fantastic day.